Hello and welcome to this edition of Standard Deviation, my column and video series. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint, and I'm going to be talking to you about how even Prime Minister Modi can't prove to you that we are the fifth largest economy in the world, simply because the data will let him down. The next time somebody, even the PM, talks about India being the fastest growing economy or that it's the fifth largest in the world, ask them to prove it. Even Mr. Modi will not be able to do it. The huge amounts of government data that will be thrown at you will almost all be incorrect, and the analysis done on them will be guesswork at best. The reason for this is not some convoluted or fancy statistical reason. It's much simpler than that. The data is outdated and largely meaningless. The most recent actual data for the Indian economy we have is about 12 years old. So, Amritkal may be the target, but we don't even know our starting point as yet. Let's take something as conceptually simple as per capita GDP, which is basically the total output of the country divided by the population. It serves as a broad proxy to denote the wealth of an average Indian. Should be simple enough to calculate, right? Let's start with the numerator, which is the GDP figure. The agriculture sector probably has the most up-to-date data when it comes to the overall GDP measure, and even that comes with a delay of about 2 years. The Directorate of Economics and Statistics in the Ministry of Agriculture compiles the data on India's agriculture output for any given year, releases 4 advance estimates before the final figure comes out about 2 years after the collection. Such a short delay of about 2 years might have been okay if agriculture formed a larger part of our GDP. But with a share of less than 20%, accuracy of agricultural data, while important, doesn't actually improve the quality of the overall GDP number. In fact, from here, it just becomes worse. The manufacturing sector is divided into the organized sector and the unorganized sector. Data for the organized sector used to come from the annual survey of industries, which came with a significant lag. Now it comes from the much more up-to-date MCA 21 database, which is compiled by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. That's not the problem here. The unorganized sector is where the problem lies. The unorganized sector or the informal sector is by definition difficult to quantify because there are no formal metrics through which such an audit can take place. If you could effectively measure it, it would not be unorganized or informal. In other words, it is called the unorganized sector because you can't measure it. Policymakers have gotten around this problem by periodically doing a nationwide survey on these sectors. Using the findings of the survey of the informal sector, the statisticians in the government then arrive at a ratio that can neatly be multiplied by the size of the formal sector to arrive at an approximate size of the informal economy. So let's say, for example, that the formal sector is rupees 100 in size, and the ratio for the informal sector that the statisticians have arrived at is 1.25. So you multiply 100 with 1.25 and you get rupees 125, which is the estimated size of the informal sector. Ideally, this would work well. However, at a time when the latest survey of the informal sector, which is called the Unincorporated Enterprises Survey, is from about 13 years ago, well before demonetization, GST, COVID, we don't really know what shape the informal sector is in right now. Then we come to the services sectors. Trade, hotels, restaurants, real estate all have significant contributions to GDP and a sizable informal segment, all of which are based on surveys that were conducted in 2011-12 or around then. Just think about the huge change the Indian economy has witnessed since 2011, both the positive and the negative. Inequality has widened, but access to basic essentials has improved. Demonetization wiped out 86% of the cash in the system overnight, while the indirect tax system was overhauled with GST. A pandemic disrupted the economy like never before. And then there are the numerous smaller changes that over time become big. For example, The movie theater industry has changed so dramatically over the last 10 years. An entire generation of entrepreneurs are minting money by creating just 2-minute videos. There's now the gig economy, which is growing really, really fast. And none of these or the million other changes to the Indian economy over the last decade are being captured in the data. So coming back to our per capita GDP example that we were talking about, we just dealt with the numerator part and found that almost every aspect of it is outdated. The denominator is the population of India, which is measured by the census of India. When was the latest one? You guessed it, 12 years ago. So if the GDP number as well as the population size are both more than a decade old, then when somebody talks about the size of the economy or per capita income, what are they talking about? It's not the present for sure. Our data issues don't end there. The other big number on everybody's mind is inflation. An analysis by ThePrint that it had done last week shows that the consumer price index, which is what the RBI looks at when it talks about inflation, falls woefully short of truly measuring the impact of rising prices on the people. The weightage for food is too high, while that of fuel and services such as health, education, transport, communication are all too low. So, you have a situation where the overall inflation rate gets affected by the change in the price of wheat, even though 80 crore Indians currently get it for free. Or you have a situation where fuel prices shoot up in response to global oil prices, but the overall inflation rate barely registers it. And while the middle class increasingly prefers private hospitals and private schools, and don't forget tuition classes, this increased spending on health and education is not getting captured in the inflation data. In fact, with the latest usable household consumption expenditure survey being only available for the year 2011-12, we actually have only a vague idea about how people are spending their money and how much they are earning. It's fine for developed countries like the US to not update their CPI for around 40 years, though even there it might be a little time for a revision. But the rate of change in those countries in these basic economic indicators is much lower than in emerging economies like India. Here, a decade is a very long time and a lot can change during it. It's not just these though. Several lesser known but key surveys that underpin the very basic estimates we have of the economy haven't been updated in years. The economic census is 9 years old, the employment survey is 12 years old, as is the base year of the index of industrial production. The input-output tables, which are critical to measuring the relationship between production and use of various items in the economy, are 15 years old. The government can say all it wants about Amrit Kal arriving and India becoming a developed nation by 2047. But if it wants to seriously achieve this trajectory, it is first going to have to establish where we stand now. On that note, that's all from me. Thank you for watching.